Thank you, Mr. President. Today is a historic day, and this bill is of critical importance. I want to start by thanking so many of my colleagues who worked long and hard to get to this point, most notably Senator Bailey, who you just heard debate the bill, and we'll hear from again, and our leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who has been a historic figure in this chamber and has led us to this day. But it doesn't just stop with the two of them. In the course of this discussion over the last several weeks and months, in talking to members of this body and members of the Assembly who are leaders in their communities, leaders in the black communities in our state, and how every single one of them has a personal story to tell about how the lives of black people in this country are different than everyone else's when it comes to interactions with law enforcement and with the police. Many have been very personally affected directly, as we all saw in the news with Senator Myrie and Assemblywoman Richardson, where pepper sprayed when trying to keep the peace in a protest. Others have had their families be subject to that kind of behavior through the years. And almost all of them and all of us that have any friends who are black have heard stories of the inequity of our police forces. Now, how did we get to this point? Because too often, the police themselves, their union leaders, their defenders, take an adversarial approach, as if no one can do anything wrong if they're wearing a badge. And you see it anytime there's an accusation. The first line of defense, oh, there must have been something, must have been something else you don't understand, you didn't see it. Until, lo and behold, everyone got cameras on their phones and body cameras on some uniforms. Then that got stripped away. Then it must be something else. Then it must be the demonization of the victim, which we've seen time and again, going back 20 years when Rudy Giuliani did it to Patrick Dorisman, releasing juvenile records as if that somehow means someone should be abused and beaten and killed. That instinct to defend at all costs is why we have a systemic problem with law enforcement. And when all those layers get stripped away, when it becomes indefensible, when you see some of these incidents, it comes down to, well, then, must be that individual cop. He's a problem. He's a bad apple, is what we hear a lot. It's fascinating to me that the bad apple metaphor gets used in this context, because it's almost as if those that use it have lost sight of where it came from. The idea of a bad apple spoiling the bunch is that when you have a basket of apples and one of them is bad, the rot infests the other apples in the basket. And that's what's happened in our police in this country. Because there's not been a willingness to acknowledge the systemic problem and deal with it, and say, yes, there is inequity, there's injustice in law enforcement in this country, we have spoiled the whole barrel of apples and the entire system. As we sit here today, taking what should be the most basic of approaches and saying, let us know who the people with a history of problems are, so that we can work to improve the system and instill more confidence and faith in it on behalf of the public, there's resistance even to that. I mean, make no mistake, the repeal of 50A that we're doing right now is critical and important, but it should be just the beginning to changing our society in a way that all people are treated equally. And we have a law enforcement that's actually enforcing the laws and not doing things that should not be within its purview. And so I am proud to cast my vote in the affirmative on this bill. I thank again Senator Bailey and all my colleagues who have had to live a different life than many of us. Growing up, I saw a uniform and I saw a protector. That's what I was taught. And for people of color in our country, they look at it and see a threat. And they're not wrong. And so I'm proud of the entire package of bills we're passing this week, and I'm most proud to cast a vote in the affirmative on this bill repealing 50A. Thank you, Mr. President.